Welcome to Stat Masters, where we teach you how to use Player Profiler to win at fantasy football and better evaluate players. My name is Aaron Stewart, and I'm a senior analyst for Player Profiler. And my co-host is Chris Bonagura, a fantasy intelligence network analyst for Player Profiler. Chris, who are we talking about today?
Hey, Aaron. So I think today we need to talk about some injury-related players. There seems to be a lot of back and forth, as always, as most years, for players who recently or in the last season suffered injury, how it affects their fantasy performance and how it affects how we view them now. I want to start with Chris Godwin because I think he's a very relevant one. Someone who last season was dealing with the post-injury year. So 2 years ago, 2021, as most know, tore his ACL in week 15 in December. That's just super late for an ACL tear. Comes back last year, week 1, struggles a little bit with injury. So if we look at his game log last year, plays week 1, which is a miracle given the timeline of the ACL. Really does nothing the first 7 weeks, which is within reason, given that he came off the ACL. But it's not like terrible. I mean, at week 1, he was off the map entirely, but then he was finishing, top 30 in fantasy points at least those following weeks. And then by week 10, I mean, he's back up to full speed, multiple top 10 finishes, rarely falling outside of the top 30. He really didn't lose a step. Watching him, for sure, there was a little bit of effect from the ACL, but what Chris Godwin did last season, coming back, first year off an ACL tear, a late ACL tear, finishing as the RB15 in PPR points per game after being the RB7 the year prior, and now having a very good career of top 10, top 5, and top 20 finishes. For a player that is now finally getting some respect on Underdog, it's certainly someone I want to keep drafting. He currently sits at wide receiver 29 with an ADP of 55.6, firmly a middle of the 5th round pick. That's more of a recent occurrence for Godwin. He was a 6th round pick, sometimes falling even into the early 7th for most of the offseason up to this point. I think he'll keep steadily rising a bit and settle in as an early 5th round pick. But even that is a steal. I mean, wide receiver 29 for a guy who came off this notoriously difficult injury to come off of and was still relatively good, is entering his age 28 season and has just been great his whole career. I mean, if we want to look at 2021, where he was wide receiver 7, not even a career year for him, he earned a 21% target share, competing with Mike Evans for targets and Antonio Brown at one point. Number 8th in slot snaps. Average target distance wasn't great, but he at least earned some deep targets, and he was number 3 in yards after the catch. He was getting accurate targets from Tom, but he was doing with them. He was playing very well. We look at last season, still looking relatively good, even with the dip, still number 6 in yards after the catch. Doesn't have a great A dot, but Tom Brady, as we all know, wasn't throwing it deep. They were just snapping the ball, and he had a league quick release of less than 3 seconds from snap to toss the ball. No one's getting it deep. He's a very good player, and he just doesn't get enough respect. And he is kind of the poster child right now for sometimes players can come back that first year off the ACL and be more impressive than we think. It's not every player that is bad. You often see it in guys that are the best of their position, not players that are just okay, but players that are truly elite. And I think Chris Godwin is truly elite.
It wasn't just the ACL tear. That's the crazy thing. He also tore the MCL. And that's the same injury that Javonte Williams suffered and is trying to come back from this upcoming season. But that is remarkable, to tear multiple ligaments in your knee, go and essentially not miss any time. Like week 1, he played. And he suffered that injury in week 15. And he goes out, finishes as wide receiver 15 in PPR, right? While only scoring 3 touchdowns, too, on top of that. He's never been like a huge touchdown guy, but still, like that ADP of wide receiver 29. The hardest thing I have with him is drafting too much of them, right? But looking at the analytics of this past season too, like his expected fantasy points per game, and yes, it's PPR, but it was top 10. It was number 9. He was actually expected to do better than what he did. Then, like Chris Godwin, the thing that he does well is he's one of the best route runners, and we saw it. If you go to the bottom, the last row, he was number 20 in route win rate, and he did that on 557 routes run. That was number 10 amongst receivers. And the problem when you tear your ACL, right? We see it time and time with players. It's usually a mental thing. The cutting motion causing people to miss. They're hesitant to do that first season back because it's always in the athlete's mind of, oh no, I might re-injure myself. It did not affect Chris Godwin one bit. Number 13th in juke rate. Yeah, not a metric that I would say correlates to fantasy points. Very impressive for a guy that tore up his knee late the previous season. And in best ball points added, he was number 20. And this is a best ball podcast. He's going as wide receiver 29. He suffered probably the worst injury that most players could suffer. Maybe Achilles is worse than that, but multiple ligaments torn in the knee, that's pretty bad. And went out and was still dominant. 4th straight season that in PPR, he finished as a top 15 wide receiver. Why is he going at wide receiver 29? It's insane. He's an incredible value.
Yeah, 2 last notes also. This time last year, he was the same price on Underdog. Mid 5th round pick, sometimes fell to the 6th round, and that was fresh off the injury. We're now a year removed, and he hasn't gotten any more expensive despite outperforming expectations. And the one thing everyone's always going to counter it with is quarterback play, pass volume for the Bucs this year. Those things do not matter for Chris Godwin. Whatever you're projecting Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask to do, or the Bucs to do in terms of pass volume, I promise it's not as bad as you're thinking it is. And for a player this talented, the situation doesn't matter at all. He's going to be fine. Now, a player where situation is heavily factored in and talent is not as clear-cut is DeAndre Swift. And this is a player that is very difficult to peg down right now, value-wise. Not necessarily coming off a direct injury, but coming off a career of back and forth injury. Not a reliable player with missed time every season. A multitude of soft tissue style injuries, things that indicate poor conditioning at the NFL level, not necessarily freak injuries. And he now goes to this situation on the Philadelphia Eagles that just last year produced Miles Sanders as an RB2, and we know is one of the most prolific offenses in football. He has to compete with his own quarterback for goal line work and for overall rush volume. And there's the known fact that with these running style quarterbacks and someone like Hurts who can run but also throw it down the field so well, there's not a huge need for dump offs to the running back, something that Swift would typically feast on. Now, we look at his cost, everything's going to come down to ADP. And Swift is one of the cheapest he's ever been, a player who's always flirted with top 4 round value because that's how his talent has been perceived up to this point. Now sits as RB23 overall at ADP 77.6. He is a 7th round pick. In the 7th round, you can certainly dabble with Swift. He does fall. In the 8th round, it seems much better. This Philadelphia situation is certainly a tough one to peg down. One thing I saw, I forgot who said it recently, which made a lot of sense. DeAndre Swift, up to this point in his career, has been a part-time player the entire time. And on a part-time role, has finished as a top 20 fantasy asset on a much worse team. Now, you have to bake in the help he got from low-level quarterbacks that dump it off. Certainly, you have to worry about his volume receiving-wise, but last season, 70 targets. That was definitely really good. 78 targets the year prior, 57 targets the year before that. That was his bread and butter from a fantasy standpoint. And then we can go look at Miles Sanders and this Philadelphia offense. You know, Miles Sanders last season saw 26 targets. That's really rough. We can look at what Kenneth Gainwell got, maybe get a bigger picture of the volume here overall. And Gainwell looked at 29 targets. So even if you combine their target volume, it's still not at where you would want Swift to be to actualize his ceiling. So you're now going to have to rely on him more as a runner. And his backfield mate, Rashad Penny, who is arguably more injury prone, I think most would agree, seems like a more talented pure runner than Swift would be, even though he's certainly an explosive player. So we look at what Swift's done on the field. Not earning a lot of snaps or opportunity, sub 40% in those categories, only 99 carries last year. We all know it was a good year for Jamal Williams, the 48 receptions. But what he does do well is the yards per reception is very good, number 10th. His yards per route run is number 5. His juke rate was number 16, number 2 in yards per touch, number 2 in yards created per touch, number 5 in breakaway run rate. That was last season. We could look at 2 seasons ago, see how wide this picture actually goes. Much better opportunity in snap share 2 years ago, was also a little healthier. Yards per reception was 7.3, still very good. Yards per route run wasn't quite as good, but still top 20. Still top 20 in juke rate, number 1 in yards created per touch, number 14th in breakaway run rate. I mean, by every metric and every stat you would have, this is certainly an explosive player who finds a way to create when given the ball. There's genuine volume concerns, given that Rashad Penny can also run the ball well, and Kenneth Gainwell can theoretically catch the ball. But I still think it would make sense for the Eagles to feature Swift over those guys. The real question is going to be touchdown equity with such talented receivers, with overlap with what Dallas Goedert does, and Jalen Hurts' overall talent. So Swift, to me, is a purchasable because of the upside case. We did see with Miles Sanders, if a running back on this Eagles team can run hot with touchdowns, they can produce fantasy volume. But touchdown, to have touchdown regression be so consistent year to year is hard to commit to. Swift is certainly cheap. He's around the price Sanders was last year. This is a low exposure middle round player. I'm not just hitting the button every time, but if he's there and a running back fits into your mix and he's cheap and you haven't drafted him too much, I'm not going to say he's undraftable, but this is certainly a tread lightly player. I don't think it's the same as what we had with Sanders last year. Sanders has been more reliable health-wise, and he's been a little better on the ground, where Swift is more of a pure receiver, and this is not a great situation for someone of his skill set.
For full transparency, I used to be a huge DeAndre Swift fan. Unfortunately, over the course of last season and just doing regular redraft fantasy football week to week and looking at trends of usage and everything like that, the thing I realized is when everyone got pissed off about Jamal Williams, quote unquote, vulturing touchdowns from DeAndre Swift, what they were missing was the NFL told us that Swift is not what we in fantasy football think he should be. He's not a guy that's going to dominate touches and snaps and everything. He is a part-time running back. Super efficient, right? Super efficient. He will always look good in the efficiency metrics. But in his 3-year career, he's only finished inside the top 30 in opportunity share once. His weighted opportunities in his 3 seasons have ranked 28th as a rookie, 12th his sophomore season, and then dropped to 28th in his 3rd season. More than likely, he's closer to his rookie and 3rd season in terms of usage, where he's fine, but he's not going to dominate touches. And when you're looking to win in fantasy football, volume is key. You can give me the most efficient running back. That's great. It's awesome. We'll always pound our fist on the table to say, give this guy more touches. But in 3 seasons, it's hardly led to more touches, more volume for Swift. And last season with Detroit, right? It is a lesser offense than the Philadelphia Eagles. They were number 13 in team run plays per game, about 3 less run plays per game than Philadelphia, right? So Swift's going to have to do it on the ground, as you mentioned. Philadelphia is a run-first team that didn't throw the ball much to their running backs. And Swift is an explosive pass catcher, as you mentioned, but man, he's not going to get that type of volume in the receiving game. And in a similar run heavy offense, he was number 15 in points per game and number 25 in expected points per game. That is PPR. It was because of heavy touchdowns. And you talked about the touchdown regression. Like, we are banking on Swift coming in his first year and doing exactly what Miles Sanders did, which Sanders scored a lot of touchdowns. He had a great season. He finished as running back 21 last season with the Philadelphia Eagles. And do I think that Swift has a better season than what Sanders did last season with the Eagles? I don't think so. And that was running back 21. Right now, Swift's ADP is running back 23. I have got a little bit of Swift, but usually in best ball, the teams I've drafted Swift has been when he's fallen like half a round or more past his ADP. He's just not a guy I'm targeting. It's the classic fantasy football guy that everyone loves, but just isn't producing.
Yeah, he does fall sometimes. Not entirely undraftable, but you bring up very good points, Aaron. And yeah, I hate to use situation as a marker to draft or not to draft a guy. And when a guy as talented as Swift starts to fall, it's certainly going to attract your attention, but I would love for him to be cheaper. We spoke a couple weeks ago about really liking Miles Sanders because his scenario in Carolina opens the door for very high targets, given how Bryce Young is probably going to be forced to play and the weak wide receiver and running back rooms. If Swift was on Carolina right now and Sanders on Philly still, I would flip their ADPs happily. I would take Swift in the 5th round because you could see that was 80, 90 targets. It's really hard to see him get the targets he needs, and that's going to be tough for Swift. So moving on, we have the very quick case. We're not going to dive too into it for Kyler Murray. I don't even think we need stats. We all know Kyler Murray is a very good quarterback. Just look at the counting numbers. In his 3 seasons in the NFL, number 3, number 4, and number 7 in fantasy points per game. And last year, he played banged up. He played with incomplete receiving room all season. He certainly had things going against his favor, and in a team that is now transition coaching, he is certainly coming into the season injured, but it's gone too far with fading him. He had the ACL and meniscus in week 14, similar to Chris Godwin and Javonte Williams. That's a very tough injury, but now it's not a running back or a receiver. It's not a skill position player. It's a quarterback. We know historically quarterbacks can still be very useful in the short term off that ACL injury. And he's just gotten too cheap, even with the concern of missing time. He's QB 22, ADP 168, and Kyler falls, man. Kyler falls to, I've seen him fall as far as the 17th round. I've seen him go in the 180s. Nobody is confident on him, but he does offer high-end QB1 upside when he is healthy. And if you look at Justin Fields and what Fields did last year, I think there's a similar, I think it builds a case as to why Kyler is very much worth the pick. Justin Fields last season was a 14th round pick, went in the general ballpark that Murray's going now. If anything, he was even a little more expensive, was going more so in the 140s. And you look at Fields' game log last season. I mean, the first 4 weeks, Justin Fields gave you nothing. No good finishes, was not helping you at all. Even in week 5 when he was QB 13, it was only 17 points. Didn't eclipse 20 points till week 7. And then from week 7 onward, absolutely tore it up. Won you tournaments, right? Did a great job advancing you. You just needed someone else to get you through those first 5 weeks. There were plenty of quarterbacks that did it. If you drafted Fields and paired him with Jared Goff, who had a great September, you combined for one of the best quarterback rooms that you could have in fantasy football last year, and you probably, at least within your 12-team pod of round 1, had the best quarterback scoring. There's no reason Kyler can't do that. Kyler can be awful in September or not play at all and come back to still return you really good value down the stretch, as he's always done. Aaron, any stats you want to throw in for Kyler?
The other thing that happened recently, of course, was his team, the Arizona Cardinals, releasing DeAndre Hopkins. And I believe what people are doing is they're going, oh, man, not only is he injured, and they probably assume that he's going to come back, but they're like, oh, Kyler Murray just doesn't have any weapons. It's going to be a bad team. And like, we don't want those quarterbacks. And this is where I've got to pump the brakes, because last year, the New York Giants, I thought, was the least talented NFL team, and was not alone. I'm sure plenty of people had the Giants competing for the number 1 overall pick. And a lot of those same things that we talk about with Kyler Murray and his situation, oh, he doesn't have weapons, it's a bad team, was the exact same thing that we could have said about Daniel Jones last year, who was going in a similar spot. Like, Kyler Murray is now a 14th round pick. And that's Daniel Jones. And guess what? It's a running quarterback, some Konami code upside. And yeah, Murray's probably not going to have his best rushing season, but still, Murray, who has been a top 12 QB in each of his 4 seasons in the NFL, is a proven Konami code quarterback that can win you leagues, that has, I believe, a QB4 season in points per game. You're getting in 14th round. Daniel Jones last year, the reason he was going around that ADP was we knew he could run. And we knew there were some things that if it all came together, it could look good. And it resulted in a QB 10 season this past year, but he was unproven. Yet the proven commodity with the rushing ability and the ability to make plays with his arm, we are allowing Kyler Murray to go that far? Nah. Murray, when he comes back, like what he won't have with his legs, he can still make plays with Marquise Brown, which, remember, Marquise Brown, the start of last season, where it was really just Kyler Murray and Marquise Brown. Marquise Brown was wide receiver 7 in PPR in points per game. Rondale Moore can get things done. Trey McBride in his second season, hey, that was the top rookie tight end last year. There are some weapons. It's not an overly talented team, but it is enough weapons that Kyler Murray can make some magic happen. And this Cardinals team is going to be playing from behind a lot next season. Hey, that's going to mean more pass opportunities. So just embrace the risk with Kyler Murray. He's 14th round.
It's so cheap. He goes even cheaper. You got him a lot in the 15th. You got him a lot in the 16th. Take him as early as the 12th. Because here's the thing too. I'm glad you brought up Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones in week 16 and week 17 was the QB2 and the QB3, and in week 15 was the QB9. Daniel Jones was on Pat Kerrane's team that won Best Ball Mania 3. Daniel Jones and George Kittle were 2 parts of the equation that won $2 million last year. Daniel Jones didn't do much to help during the season. He had some nice weeks, sure. A couple of QB3 finishes, was decent in October. But if you get Kyler Murray and he does what Daniel Jones did, is fully on by December and crushes it in the playoffs, and you're getting him in the 14th, 15th round, there's no trade-off here. There's no trade-off. You're not sacrificing anything that was probably substantial to your team, right? Where you're getting Kyler Murray, like, oh, okay, I couldn't draft Deontay Foreman. Big whoop, right? Raheem Mostert, 31-year-old Raheem Mostert. Rookie tight end, overpriced rookie tight end for the Lions, Sam Laporta. I'm absolutely devastated. I couldn't get him over a potential $3 million winning quarterback. Oh, I couldn't get a rookie field stretcher for the Giants who overlaps with Darius Slayton. Oh my God. I'm distraught. I'll never recover from that. Of course not. If you just shove Kyler Murray on and you have 1 or 2 other quarterbacks that get you to advance through round 1, there's no reason he can't get you through the next 2 or 3 rounds. And he's free. I mean, he's free. It's crazy. He didn't die. He'll play next year. And even if he's terrible in September and October, he's going to be great by December. And they'll figure it out. They still have Greg Dortch and stuff. It's not no one. It's just not great. The last one's a little more speculative. Aaron probably has some stats for this one. Not super stats heavy, but in regards to injuries and uncertainty and positions, I want to talk about the running back room for the New Orleans Saints, because we do have Kendre Miller, Jamal Williams, and Alvin Kamara, We have Alvin Kamara, who expects to see a suspension, but nothing has come yet. His court date is for July 31st with expectation of a swift suspension after that, but we never know with these legal proceedings. It could be an in-season when it all gets resolved, and maybe he's suspended later in the season. I think everyone expects it to be around 6 games. He goes around pick 100. Kamara, for being who he is, one of the best players in football the last couple of years. He's going to be, I believe, 28 years old. He'll be 28 years old this season. He has been, last season he took a dip, but they also put him in a running role for some reason. Otherwise, he's been a top 10 and top 5 running back his whole career. Certainly is seeing a bit of an age cliff, but with Derek Carr and the thinner receiving room, should see plenty of work. Saw 77 targets last year, was still number 8 in yards per reception, still number 6 in yards per route run. Wasn't quite as good in the other efficiency metrics, but wasn't fully off the board. Certainly a player that can still get it done for you. And the reason the Saints are so enticing is they do have a very relatively easy schedule in the playoffs this season. And I don't like trying to project a team's strength of schedule that far into the season because we don't know how teams are really going to shake out. But when you look at it, it's very hard to look at these games and have them not be games where the Saints can score points. But now Kamara might miss time. Kendre Miller is no sure thing to see a full season either. He is currently dealing with a meniscus, and reports are he hasn't practiced with the team at all yet. His injury isn't on player profiler yet, but he is dealing with that. He wasn't able to attend the combine. Kind of a question mark as a rookie. The only thing we have to go on is the draft capital. The Saints seem to believe in him, and his college production was good enough, but I wouldn't necessarily call it elite. He is the cheapest of the 3, and he now falls. He has been around 137 all offseason, RB44. I now see him go into the 150s, sometimes the 160s. And, there's certainly reason for him sliding if he's not going to play a whole year. And then Jamal Williams, who we all know, career plotter, last year ran super hot with touchdowns. The Lions ran an unfathomable amount of plays from the 1-yard line, and Jamal Williams was the recipient of that. And his first 1,000-yard season, but also his first season over 200 rush attempts. There's a real chance here that we see Jamal Williams absolutely crush September if Kendre is getting up to speed still and Alvin Kamara is suspended, just to see Kamara carry the load down the stretch and Kendre not really get his until next year. Could have been more of a long-term bet with that 3rd-round pick on Kendre, but I like peppering all of them in. I think Kendre, when he goes super cheap, on the chance that he is ready to go this year and gets to benefit from Kamara being suspended, it's a great spot. Jamal Williams is probably not going to win you the tournament, but could be a big part of the equation to advance in the early rounds. And Kamara still gives you a good chance of swinging well ahead of this RB31 ADP. Even if he finishes as the RB22 in PPR points per game and takes a bit of a dip with age, still going to be worth that cost. I just don't want to go crazy. I've seen some people take him now, 2 rounds ahead of ADP off this news of Kendre Miller not practicing yet. That's a little wild. That was like for a day. People aren't going really crazy on Kamara. I don't want to see his ADP get any more expensive, but where he does go, you can work him in. I do like some of the running backs that go after him. Charbonnet has a strong profile. A.J. Dillon could be like this year's situation of Tony Pollard if Aaron Jones gets hurt. I think a lot of people still believe in Gibson. P. Ryan's looking at volume. These guys aren't bad. It's not the easiest selection, but definitely all 3 of these guys I think are draftable. And when you have a lot of ambiguity like this in fantasy football, but a team that should produce running back points, just lean in. Take shots on all of them and hope that some of those shots hit.
Yeah, the Saints want to run the ball. I know that they did improve their passing game by going from Andy Dalton to Derek Carr, but Dennis Allen, the head coach, is a defensive-minded coach, kind of that old school guy. They wanted to establish the run, and I would agree 100% with your statement of going, look, there's 3 running backs. It's ambiguous. All 3 of them are going outside the top 30 running back spots for different reasons, and it's okay. Like, you shouldn't avoid it. you should dabble and get some of different New Orleans Saints running backs on teams. And especially when they do start to fall below ADP, definitely. And that's really good for a lot of best ball is when players do fall behind ADP. Doesn't matter if you hate the player, you got to take it. I've taken guys that I hate all the time. When they're like 20 picks below ADP, it's a great pick no matter what. And when it's deciding like which running backs to get, it's going to depend on your roster construction. So Kendre Miller, we'll start with him. The perfect one is like he's likely, his case this season is going to start slow because he hasn't practiced. They're hoping he can practice by training camp. I'm confident in the talent profile because the Saints drafted him with an early third-round pick. 308, almost a second-round pick. Like, that's good draft capital. He's got size. He's got this good all-around ability. Like, that's definitely someone that I want when I've got some running backs that maybe can get me through the first part of the season, and you're looking for those fresh legs. Like, we see it every year, right? Like a younger running back that, because they don't have a lot of wear and tear, maybe they weren't utilized a lot at the beginning of the season, it's their time to lead the backfield. I could see that being the case for Kendre Miller. It is speculative, but that's the case in point is roster construction. Maybe you went running back heavy at the start of your draft. Kendre Miller's like the perfect guy to bring in to complement that build. Whereas like Jamal Williams would be more of if you go wide receiver heavy and you're just looking for, as you talked about, the first few weeks, like that month of September, that you're just going, I need to get fantasy points. He's going to accomplish his goal. Like all these guys' ADPs are affordable, right? Like Jamal Williams and Kendre Miller in particular, like that's what, like a 10th, 11th round pick. Like usually you're looking to get some starts out of those guys. Doesn't matter what part of the season. So you're wide receiver heavy, get Jamal Williams. And then Alvin Kamara, look, a suspension's probably going to happen, but it's not definitive either. Like things have been really, really quiet for Alvin Kamara. And that's good news. That's good news. When these legal cases, when no one's talking and reporting about them, and it's been weeks since we've heard about it, that's the best case scenario for Kamara. And where you're drafting him is ADP of like 100, right? Like, come on. Like Kamara is still scoring you fantasy points. Even a bad season for Kamara, he was RB 13 in PPR points per game, and you're getting him outside the top 100. If he slips, don't be afraid. Like if we're playing tournaments here, you're swinging for upside already. And just think about the upside. Like you're competing against the field, and you get Kamara, who maybe plays a full season outside the top 100 picks. Wow. Like you're separating yourself from the field big time. So dabble, don't go heavy on any of those three guys, but you do enough of these tournament lineups, these tournament drafts, you want some of each of these three guys for the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah, fully agreed. These guys were designed for this tournament type structure where you draft 150 teams to max, just kind of take equal exposure to all of them. It could shake out any one of, a number of ways. And if you're in more of a one-off type league and you only get one shot, just abide by the good old-fashioned fantasy rule of take the cheapest one. Hope it works out. And, in regards to injury-related players and ambiguity right now in drafts that kind of are causing ADPs to slip, I feel like we've pretty much covered the bases.
And that's going to conclude this episode of Stat Masters. If you like this video, go ahead, leave a like on the YouTube video. Comment, let us know the takes that you liked. Comment, let us know the takes that you don't like. Like, we're all about discussions. And make sure that you're subscribed to the Player Profiler YouTube channel. And one more thing, we do the show live on Discord, and you should join the Player Profiler Discord server. That's playerprofiler.com/chat. Come join us as we do the show live. If you have questions after the show, we will answer your questions. And from Aaron and Chris, we bid you adieu until next time.
Hey, you like that video? Be sure to subscribe and activate those alerts so you get notified as soon as new videos drop. And be sure to check out playerprofiler.com. We have all the tools for you to dominate every type of fantasy league. We have a draft kit, Dynasty Deluxe, data analysis, DFS Dominator, and don't forget the player rankings to rule them all.